I'm Ariana Scott, and this is The Goddess Recordings, an independent documentary series from Signal Found Productions and the Trans Wiki Project. In our last episode, we traced the moment when Raquel Reyes' private survival became public velocity. When grief braided itself into a scent and a digital presence evolved into physical circulation. By the early 2000s, Raquel's image no longer lived only on screens. Her international touring schedule placed her directly in front of admirers across America and Europe. In the evenings, she moved effortlessly through packed nightclubs in the major cities she visited, often photographed alongside the architects of nightlife itself, those who built the scenes others only entered. She was hired to host exclusive adult gatherings in private mansions in the Hollywood Hills and across Orange County, environments where sexuality, wealth, and excess converged under strict discretion. Rumours of her interactions with several high-profile musicians of the era further deepened her legend, blending nightlife, celebrity culture, and queer subcultural glamour in ways that made her both elusive and unmistakably present. And when radio shock jocks began speaking her name on air, sometimes with fascination, sometimes with provocation, it signaled that Raquel Reyes was moving through multiple layers of culture at once: digital, subcultural, and increasingly mainstream adjacent. But even as her visibility expanded across continents and industries, the internet she had once mastered was beginning to change beneath her feet. In 2003, a platform called MySpace introduced a new form of self-circulation, one built not around static pages, but around personal profiles. For the first time, identity online was no longer something you published. It was something you occupied. Soon after, YouTube followed. And with it came the normalization of moving images as the web's dominant language. What had once required editing, hosting, and technical gatekeeping became frictionless. Video was no longer a feature, it was the environment. At the same time, reality-based entertainment was rising in parallel, a form built on real bodies, real time, and the collapsing boundary between performance and exposure. Cultural appetite was shifting towards the amateur, toward identities that felt authentic rather than the glamorously perfected. The model of visibility that had elevated Raquel, still photography, controlled circulation, and curated distance, was being replaced by an entirely different economy. An economy of live presence that did not at all feel edited. Across the web, traffic began shifting toward cam-based platforms, spaces where trans performers, among others, now interacted in real time with paying members. Desire no longer waited for updates, and the fantasy no longer arrived as an image. It arrived as a person who could speak back. On paper, Raquel had the infrastructure to follow this transition. She had the audience, the recognition. She had the demand. But instinctively she hesitated, because live video was not simply a new format. It was a different kind of exposure altogether. Still photography could be composed. It could be edited. It could be presented carefully. Video implied duration, breadth, and vulnerability. Once moving images entered circulation, they could be captured, duplicated, slowed, broken apart frame by frame and reassembled into forms unmoored from their origin. Even then, Raquel understood that live video did not simply reveal more. It surrendered more. And beneath that hesitation was another quieter realization, one Raquel had already begun to confront. By the early 2000s, she had become aware of software circulating beneath the surface of the web, tools capable of replicating a model's likeness without her participation. Still images could be algorithmically altered, recombined, recolored, mirrored. A face could be lifted from one body and placed onto another. An identity could be rebranded, repackaged, and redistributed under a different name or circulated under the same name through images and short video fragments that had never, in fact, existed at all. These were fabrications generated and distributed by third parties, divorced from the model's consent, authorship, or reality. In some instances, the simulations moved beyond photography altogether. Short, rudimentary video sequences began to appear, flickering, imperfect, but close enough to reality to confuse the untrained eye. None of it was real. All of it traded on name recognition. Raquel understood the implication immediately. Her image was no longer only something that could be copied, it could be manufactured without her. This knowledge altered the meaning of participation itself. Refusing to appear no longer meant refusing to be used. Withholding the body did not guarantee control over the image. Her apprehension about live video deepened, not as fear of visibility, but as resistance to a system that no longer required consent in order to circulate her likeness. The threat was no longer only exposure, it was substitution. And with substitution came a deeper instability. The possibility that the carefully crafted image she guarded could continue without the body that first authored it. Raquel began making deliberate choices about where and how she would remain visible. As MySpace began to take hold as a cultural phenomenon, Raquel began growing her audience there, interacting not only with longtime followers, but with the first generation of social media users who arrived without any prior knowledge of her work. On MySpace, she traded in pure glamour, not adult content, not transaction, just presence, posed photographs, club candids with beautiful friends, and fragments of everyday life, rendered stylized and intact. For a brief moment, the platform offered Raquel something rare. Here, she was not a booking, not a destination, not an appointment. She was a profile. And the distinction mattered. Raquel's MySpace page grew quickly. Friends and followers multiplied at a pace that mirrored the platform's own rapid expansion. Musicians discovered her there. Models followed, adult film performers, club promoters, nightlife figures, and emerging celebrity orbiters began appearing in her digital circle. The ecosystem was changing again, not through live video, not through transaction, but through networked proximity. For Raquel, this offered a brief recalibration of her online world, a way to remain visible without surrendering authorship, to be seen without being seized. But even this new terrain, seemingly softer, seemingly safer, was already being shaped by the same forces transforming the rest of the web. And as those new technological changes quietly reshaped the internet she knew, Raquel began making changes of her own. Tour dates grew less frequent. The distances she was willing to traverse shortened. The circuits that had once pulled her from city to city loosened their grip. Raquel did not disappear all at once. She withdrew in increments. First for love, a real love, even if it did not last. Then for a quiet reclaiming of her own interior life. In Goddess, Raquel writes that her move to Savannah, Georgia, in 2005 was the first moment her life finally slowed enough for her to take stock of everything that had come before. In the long evenings and softened light of the coastal South, in stillness, a different kind of work began. Not simulation, reckoning. It was here that she began refining her memoir, Goddess, shaping passages she had already been quietly sharing with her online subscribers for months. These writings were often introspective and unexpected. At times, they stood in quiet contradiction to the image she had so carefully curated. But they resonated, because they revealed an emotional complexity and interior intelligence that could not be contained by image alone. What had once moved at the speed of demand was now being slowed into sentences and prose. And alongside the writing came something even more deliberate. A quiet dismantling of her website, and with it, years of archived imagery and ephemera. Not abrupt, not dramatic. It was methodical. Pages went dark, links were removed, entire digital structures, created to drive traffic to her site and once pulsing with activity, including chat rooms, message boards, and online groups, began to empty as she systematically dismantled the tools that kept them running. There was no announcement of retreat, No farewell performance, no staged vanishing, only a gradual thinning of presence. While the industry continued its turn toward live access, constant availability, and amateur dominance, Raquel was quietly stepping away from the very economy she had helped prefigure. This was not a disappearance, this was an erasure. But erasure not as defeat, erasure as a final assertion of control over an image she feared was already being copied, distorted, substituted, and sold without consent. When she stepped away from the screen, she didn't simply log off. She executed a masterwork of auto-redaction. By the time the broader culture began to realize she was no longer everywhere, she was already gone. In our next and final episode, we explore the publication of Goddess, the cult status that formed around it, Raquel's enduring cultural legacy in trans and media studies, and her post-digital life, informed by limited direct correspondence with Raquel herself. I'm Ariana Scott, and this is the Goddess Recordings, an independent documentary series from Signal Found Productions and the Trans Wiki Project.